Hey everyone, Tin Man here with a guide to the new hotness in Teamfight tactics in patch 10.7, Vel'koz Carry. A seemingly small buff to Vel'koz in the latest patch actually makes a huge difference. He now casts at 70 mana rather than at 80, so that means more casts of his powerful spell. This has helped to propel this build to the top of the meta. In this guide, we'll cover the core units to the build, go over the two variants, the probably stronger Brawler version, and a more glass cannon style Sorcerer version. We'll talk about the ideal items to look for, as well as the general strategy of leveling up and rerolling in this style of build. Then a few notes on positioning, and the most important part, when to actually play this, because blindly forcing builds is rarely optimal. Okay, first up, the core units. In this build, there are only the three Void units, Vel'koz, Cho'gath, and Kha'Zix. This synergy makes all of your Void units deal pure damage, so it negates most of the common defensive options that opponents would typically use against a magic damage heavy build, like say Mystics or magic resist items. While Vel'koz and Cho'gath come online later in the game, they will be doing the bulk of the damage in your final composition. Until you get those guys online though, you'll want to run some kind of transitional units to make sure that you can still win fights in the early and mid game. Oftentimes this will take the form of infiltrators, since you want to be prioritizing Kha'Zix in the early game. Speaking of Kha'Zix, even if you're not sure that you will be playing this exact build, if you're even thinking about it, make sure that you grab a Kha'Zix and stick them on your bench in the early game. This is a build that is focused on 4-cost units, so you may easily decide to transition into it later on, and by the time you do, the 1-cost units like Kha'Zix will actually be pretty rare and hard to find in the late game. It's a small 1 gold investment to hold him on your bench on the chance that you might use him, so just pick one up if there's any shot at all that you're going to go for this style of build. The most popular and probably the stronger variant of this build is based around Brawlers. In this build, we'll have all 4 Brawlers and all 3 Void, which will use up a total of 6 units, so the remaining slots are pretty flexible. Generally, you will want Twisted Fate, who will give the Sorcerer bonus along with Vel'koz, and the Chrono bonus along with Blitzcrank. While most of your damage comes from the massive spell casts, the bonus attack speed from Chrono is nothing to scoff at, since the Void units also deal pure damage with their auto attacks, so that helps them to easily clean up any stragglers who survive the initial spell burst. That still only makes 7 units though, and often you'll get up to level 8 with this build, so you'll frequently just put in another copy of Cho'gath or Vel'koz, or a big 5-cost unit like Gangplank if you find them. The other more glass cannon-y style version is the 6 Sorcerer version. This will run all of the Sorcerers except for Annie, along with the 3 core Void units. This build can let Vel'koz just absolutely one-shot everybody, but if he does miss some of the units, or maybe gets CC'd, or something else goes wrong in the fight, it has a lot less ability to clean up the fight. It does not nearly have as much CC or frontline as the Brawlers, and even if you have good items, then you shouldn't really be lacking for damage in either version, so all of these Sorcerers are probably a bit overkill. That being said, it is always hilarious to watch Vel'koz just sweep through their entire board and evaporate everybody he touches with the 6 Sorcerer bonus. In terms of items, you only really care about Vel'koz's items. The most important ones for him are Quicksilver, Seraph's Embrace, plus a damage item of some sort. Quicksilver is critical to making sure that he does not get hit by a Zephyr or another stun while he's channeling his Death Ray, which is going to be the bulk of your team's damage. Sometimes you may be tempted by Guardian Angel on Vel'koz, but that's not really a great substitute for Quicksilver. If he dies while channeling, he will struggle to gain the mana after being revived, so it's probably best to leave Guardian Angel on Cho'gath, who has an instant cast ult. Seraph's Embrace is critical to ensure that he casts as soon as possible right at the start of the fight, and then quickly cast again right after. If you're going for a more Sorcerer build, then you might be able to get away with replacing it with Star Guardian's Charm, since you're already going to be running Star Guardian Sorcerers, but that's kind of a corner case scenario, and Seraph's is just far more consistent and reliable. After those two, any damage item will do. I like Morellonomicon the best, since it applies some residual damage and cuts down healing, as well as just a bit more HP to maybe survive an opposing AoE effect or an infiltrator who jumps on Vel'koz. Otherwise, Rabadon's Deathcap or Jeweled Gauntlet work well for more damage. Luden's Echo is not quite as great, but in a pinch, it's better than nothing. Obviously, you'll get more than just 3 items in the game to load up the Vel'koz, but the other units don't really have a huge preference for specific items, other than maybe a Guardian Angel on Cho'gath. Just pick up good, efficient items like, say, Zephyr or Locket once you have the Vel'koz items squared away. Knowing what we want is great, but how do we get there in terms of leveling up and timings? This build is very late game centric, so the guide does not really cover much of the early stages. Just play whatever's available while picking up Kha'Zix and Brawlers. You'll likely follow a pretty typical early and mid game leveling strategy, which will involve hitting level 6 by round 3.5, and then level 7 by round 4.1. If you're doing pretty well, you might be going faster than that. At level 7, this build can really be completed. You can assemble all of the Brawlers and the Void units plus Twisted Fate with just 7 units. This gives you a little bit of flexibility to reroll on level 7 to complete some of the build and solidify your position. This will be important if you're dropping really low on life and you need a bit of a power spike to keep your health total high. Eventually, you do want to get to level 8 though, as that increases your odds on the 4-cost units, and also allows you to put another high impact unit on top of your core synergies. I typically aim for round 4.3 if I'm doing pretty well, or you can delay it until round 5.1 if you reroll a little bit on level 7. In the late game, once you hit level 8, your goal is to get a 3-star Vel'koz and Cho'gath. This will dramatically increase their damage and is basically an I win button if you can get them. Now, of course, this won't always be easy or even possible in some games if they're contested or if you're low on life and gold, but you should still pick up any extra units of Vel'koz or Cho'gath that you see, since your 8th unit will often just be a second 2-star copy of either of them. If you don't get them to 3 stars, then you might actually lack a little bit of damage in the very late game depending on your items, especially if Vel'koz maybe misses a key enemy's unit with his targeting. You can also then consider units like Gangplank or Lulu to kind of bolster your team if you can't find those more void units. In general, I found that it's almost never worth it to go to level 9 with this build. That's better for strategies that want a lot of 5-cost units, but this build really just wants the 4-cost units up to 3 stars. It's mostly going to be better to spend your gold rerolling at level 8 rather than go up to level 9. Here's a positioning example for the Brawler version. The 4 Brawlers are up on the front line with Vi on the edge so that she'll hit the most opponents with her ability. Cho'gath is placed near the center to quickly gain mana and cast, while Vel'koz is on the edge position right behind them. A second Vel'koz can go right behind the first, and a second Cho'gath, if that's your option, would go right up on the front line as well. Kha'Zix and Twisted Fate are kind of irrelevant where they go. They can be used to bait out opposing Blitzcrank hooks or Zephyrs, or hold your own Zephyr since they have flexible positioning. In the more Sorcerer-heavy version, you can position all of your units along the backline except for Cho'gath up front. The exact position of the backline doesn't matter too terribly much, but do be wary of opposing Zephyrs and hooks, and also scout out opposing infiltrators. Remember that infiltrators will always jump straight ahead of their current position, so if you can scout out where the opposing infiltrators are, make sure that you move Vel'koz away from that position. In this version, it is much more important that Cho'gath has a Guardian Angel compared to the Brawler version. Oftentimes, he'll die way too quickly and will likely not cast his ult if he does not have one if he's your only frontliner. And finally, the most important part is when to play this build. Blind forcing builds is rarely going to be correct, and instead you should use guides like this to get a better understanding of the composition so that you can play it well when the opportunity arises. That opportunity is when one of several things happen. If you get an early Seraph's Embrace or Rabadon's Deathcap, then you should highly consider this style of build. Those items are very specific, requiring 2 copies of their components, but they are both very, very strong on Vel'koz. Alternatively, if you have a Brawler start, maybe playing Malphite, Blitzcrank, and possibly some Blasters, thinking about maybe going Brawler Blasters, or maybe even Cybernetics, but your items just don't really come together, then you might want to pivot away from Blasters and over to Vel'koz. If you get more swords and bows, it might be fine to stick with a Brawlers and Blasters style build, but if you have more rods and tiers, then you should probably start looking for Kha'Zix and Vel'koz. And of course, always scout out opponents, and if no one else is going for Vel'koz, then you can move in. This factor is not quite as important as it is for some of the hyper reroll builds like Mech Infiltrators or Protectors, which rely on getting their 3-star units very quickly and early on in the game. While this build does want 3-star Vel'koz and 3-star Cho'gath, it really can be perfectly functional with just 2 stars of each as long as you have good items on them, so being contested is not the worst thing that could happen. That's it for this guide. Make sure to like and subscribe, and if you enjoy this content and want to see more of it, please do consider joining the channel. It really does help me out a lot and makes it possible for me to continue making this content. Thanks to all of my supporters, and special extra thanks to Lord Tier channel members John Vise and Abram Woodland. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you next time.